This presentation relates to improving professional practice, and my artefact is the diagnosis. In June this year, my son Charlie was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and this was the letter we received to get the ball rolling for treatment. To give you an idea of what this means for Charlie, the paediatrician said he has significant difficulty with change of activities and routines, and this is becoming a major issue for his teacher. He has significant social difficulties and doesn't understand the rules of social interaction and play. His parents are having significant difficulties with his behaviour at home. Yeah, we were. He frequently explodes with anger if asked to do anything or if he doesn't get his own way. He has unusual speech with fluency difficulties, some pronunciation errors and a monotonous quality. He has sensory issues with unusual sensitivity to smells, tastes and some noise. He has limited imaginary play and cannot play with other children in an imaginary way. He'll get fixated on certain activities and it's very hard to get him to change his activity. He bounces when he gets excited rather than flaps. So what does this label actually mean? Well, in some ways it's a very small thing. Charlie's still Charlie, he's still the same person. But in other ways it's big. It's not going to go away and it's going to be with him for the rest of his life. So I started to learn. The first thing I found, which wasn't really a surprise to me, is that Asperger's isn't one thing, it's a spectrum, and it's part of the bigger autism spectrum. There's enormous variation. So there's a saying, if you know one kid on the spectrum, you know one kid on the spectrum. So what do you know about Asperger's? Chances are you've heard they have bad social skills. You might have heard that they like computers and maths, and that they have a habit of obsessing about particular subjects. Asperger's and all autism spectrum disorders are defined by their diagnoses. This is from the DSM-4, one of the standards used to diagnose Asperger's. You can see it allows for a wide range of behaviours, requiring 2 of 4 problems with social interactions and any one of 4 kinds of repetitive or restrictive behaviours. In practice, clinicians look for an even wider range of issues, including sensory issues, idiosyncratic speech, and problems with motor skills. What I started to realise, though, is that more than anything, it's about perspective. Kids and adults on the spectrum look at the world from a very, very different perspective. I did a lot of my learning on this website, which teaches through the eyes of parents of kids on the spectrum. It talks about kids that are severely affected right through to high-functioning Asperger's. Listening to their stories, I found familiar elements in all of them, but none of them were exactly the same as my son, which was really no surprise. The common themes that come through are that people on the spectrum perceive the world differently and have different priorities. Many have the same capacity to learn, but they start in different places. I have a much better understanding of my son now, and that's changed my approach to him. Things have improved quickly as a result of that. Already he's calmer, happier, and less likely to lash out physically. So changing perspective now to that of a teacher, I also realised that understanding doesn't mean making excuses or lowering standards. It means different kinds of support for different kinds of things. It might mean needing specific sensory stimuli, a way to escape a situation if it's overwhelming, or help with social skills. The teaching standards tell us that we need to be able to teach students with special needs and to be able to create a positive learning environment for all of our students. For kids on the spectrum, equity clearly doesn't equal equality. Some students may need to be allowed to play with their Rubik's Cubes, listen to music, or have access to a quiet space. They might need to be able to submit their assignments in other ways. A safe learning environment can look quite different for different students. Changing perspective again, I'd like to read out what I wrote the day after my son was diagnosed. It was written entirely from the perspective of a parent because I hadn't even started to think about it as a teacher yet. While I'm reading it, I'll show you the picture that is the background for this presentation. Charlie, who was 6, made this for me for this presentation when I asked him for something special. I've mentioned before that I'm label averse, so what gives with me giving my son an official label? It's prompted some reflection, I can tell you. As well as being label averse, I'm a champion justifier, and I think I've justified this quite well. I don't think I accept that Asperger's is a real label. I certainly don't accept that it's a disorder. It's a different way of being, one that the world we live in doesn't make much room for. This is, obviously, a description that applies to a great deal of things that are referred to as disabilities. I've been slowly shifting my perception of a lot of these issues for a while now, but there's nothing like living with one of them to push you that bit harder. Charlie needs this label because the world he lives in is so bloody intolerant and inflexible that spending a morning of kindergarten class filling a page with musical notes will generally get him a much less attractive label of uncooperative or doesn't follow directions or some such. It didn't, as it happens, because he has a most wonderful kindergarten teacher. But he's not likely to carry that luck all the way through school. He needs a piece of paper to say, "Please let me be me, because I have a label you have to respect." That's a pretty sad indictment of our school system. I need him to have this label to access some help for parenting a kid like him. His behaviour doesn't fit the standard parenting manuals, and why would anybody want to broaden the ideas presented to cover children with a disorder? A parent will clearly need specialist help with that. Of course, kids like him are very common, and always have been, but their parents have largely muddled through, finding things that work by trial and error. I wonder how many kids' parents couldn't find the right path, and how badly some of those kids suffered as a result. I wonder if Charlie's uncle might be one of them, but we'll never know. I wonder how many of them might have been helped if conventional wisdom had included some diversity in the patterns of kids' behaviour. So I'm seeing this label as a way of demanding respect and caring from a world that finds him inconvenient. But I'm also not really accepting it as a label. It's a diagnosis or something. It's a means of being understood until such time as the world moves on and accepts that we don't all think alike, or socialise alike, or even perceive the world alike. Hopefully one day he'll just be Charlie again. Not because he's changed, but because the world has. I've realised that I need to keep this parent's perspective in mind when I'm teaching other people's Charlies. Of course, keeping it in mind when you're faced with 30 students, 10 of whom share a total of 15 identified special needs, is hard. I know, because that was my Year 7 class on prac, and I went straight into the standard behaviour management techniques we've all been taught. But I realised after a couple of lessons that in the end, that's the harder option. With my son, in 3 months of understanding, we achieved far more than we did in 6 years of behaviour management. The same thing applies in the classroom. We need to reach out to these kids where they are and provide the help they need as individuals. It sounds hard, but I've really come to understand that it's actually easier for us and for them in the long run. What I've learned about Asperger's applies to all students. There's no point starting with the assumption that if you treat them as though they are all the same, they will somehow start to behave the way you want them to. On the other hand, if you find out where each kid is and what areas challenge them, you can target your efforts to provide the support they actually need. Suddenly, you're helping students succeed instead of managing problems, and I can tell you with heartfelt sincerity that that's both easier and much more rewarding.